In the desert of southeastern Utah, the land appears still and open. Wide plateaus stretch toward distant horizons, interrupted by deep fractures where water once carved narrow paths through sandstone. Somewhere within this maze of rock corridors, a single moment in April 2003 would quietly unfold into a survival story lasting 127 hours. Blue John Canyon lies within the remote canyonlands west of the Green River. From above, it is almost invisible. The desert surface gives little indication of the deep slots hidden beneath it. Narrow passages twist through layers of Navajo sandstone, some only a few feet wide. Sunlight enters these corridors only briefly during the day, sliding across the stone walls before disappearing again. The canyon system forms a natural labyrinth. Sections widen into sandy chambers before tightening abruptly into vertical gaps, barely large enough for a person to pass through sideways. The walls rise sharply, smooth and curved, by centuries of flash floods. When the water is gone, silence returns quickly. In late April, the desert air is dry and cool in the morning. Light spreads slowly across the canyon country. Small shrubs cling to the plateau above, while the deeper corridors below remain shaded. The area is popular among experienced canyoneers, but it is also isolated. Cell phone signals rarely reach these narrow passages. Travel inside them can require climbing, squeezing, and careful movement over loose rock. On the morning of the 26th of April, 2003, one climber moved through this landscape alone. His name was Aron Ralston. Aron Lee Ralston was born on the 27th of October 1975 in Marion, Ohio, in the United States. During his childhood, his family later moved to Colorado, where the Rocky Mountains formed a constant presence along the horizon. The landscape shaped many of his interests early. Hiking, climbing, and long days outdoors became routine parts of his life. Ralston studied mechanical engineering at the Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The program was demanding and technical. After graduating in 1998, he began working as an engineer for Intel. The job provided stability and a clear professional path. But the routine of office work contrasted sharply with the kind of environments he preferred. Colorado offered something different. The state contains more than 50 mountain peaks rising above 14,000 feet, commonly called 14ers. Among climbers and mountaineers, ascending all of them is considered a long-term challenge that requires endurance, planning, and careful navigation. By the early 2000s, Ralston had set a personal goal to climb every one of Colorado's 14ers during winter conditions, and to do many of them solo. Solo climbing was not unusual among experienced mountaineers, but it required strict self-reliance. There would be no partner to assist if something went wrong. In 2002, Ralston left his engineering job to focus more fully on climbing and exploration. Much of his time was spent traveling between the mountains of Colorado and the canyon landscapes of the American Southwest. The region includes areas such as Canyonlands National Park, a vast protected landscape known for its deep river canyons and isolated desert plateaus. Canyoneering, the activity of traveling through narrow desert canyons using climbing and scrambling techniques, had become one of Ralston's regular pursuits. The sport combines hiking, climbing, and route finding. Participants often descend through slot canyons, where the walls narrow dramatically, requiring sideways movement or short drops between rock ledges. These environments are visually striking but also complex to navigate. Many sections receive very little direct sunlight. Floodwater occasionally rushes through them during storms, shifting rocks and reshaping the passageways. Between floods, however, the canyons remain quiet and empty for long periods of time. By the spring of 2003, Ralston had already spent years traveling through these landscapes. He was familiar with desert survival basics, climbing anchors, rope systems, and navigation, using maps and terrain features. His trips were often planned quickly. Sometimes he informed friends of his destination. At other times he left without giving a detailed itinerary. On Friday evening, the 25th of April 2003, Ralston drove from Colorado into southeastern Utah. The desert was entering late spring. Temperatures were beginning to rise during the day, but remained cool overnight. The next morning, April 26, he set out alone to explore a section of Blue John Canyon, located within the canyonlands west of the Green River. He carried standard equipment for a short canyoneering trip: a small backpack, climbing gear, a camera, some food, and a limited supply of water. What he did not leave behind was a precise description of where he planned to travel that day. The canyon system he entered was narrow, quiet, and largely unvisited that morning. Several hours later, deep inside one of its sandstone corridors, a single movement of rock would change the course of the next 5 days. On the morning of the 26th of April, 2003, Aron Ralston entered a section of Blue John Canyon known for its narrow slot passages. The route moved gradually downward through sandstone chambers that alternated between open spaces and tight corridors. In several places, the canyon walls narrowed to only a few feet apart. Movement through these sections required careful positioning of the body, sometimes turning sideways and lowering oneself through vertical gaps between the rock. At one point in the descent, Ralston approached a drop of roughly 3 meters. A large chockstone, a boulder wedged naturally between the canyon walls, sat above the gap. Rocks like this are common in slot canyons. Over time, falling stones become trapped between the narrowing walls, forming natural obstacles that climbers must move around or descend past. Ralston began lowering himself down the drop, using the wedged boulder as a support point while shifting his body weight downward into the slot. As he did, the rock moved. The boulder, later estimated to weigh around 360 kilograms, had appeared stable but was not fully secure. When his weight shifted against it, the stone suddenly dislodged. The movement was immediate. The boulder dropped downward with him into the narrow gap. His right arm was forced against the canyon wall as the rock fell. The stone slammed into place between the two sandstone sides, trapping his forearm and wrist. The impact pinned him firmly against the canyon wall. At first, Ralston attempted to pull his arm free, using his full body weight. The canyon space was extremely narrow. The rock pressed tightly between the walls, leaving almost no room for movement. He pushed against the boulder with his legs and his free arm. The rock did not shift. He attempted to chip away small pieces of sandstone around the trapped area using the knife from his multi-tool. The canyon walls were dense and hard. The tool was not designed for cutting rock. Within a short time, the situation became clear. The boulder was too heavy to move with the leverage available inside the narrow space. Ralston remained alone in the canyon. He had not told anyone his exact route that morning. The remote section of Blue John Canyon received few visitors. The rock held his arm in place. The desert around him remained silent. After the rock came to rest, Aron Ralston remained partially wedged between the canyon walls. His right forearm was trapped beneath the boulder, pinned firmly against the sandstone. The rock had settled tightly between the sides of the narrow slot, leaving almost no visible gap. For several minutes, he continued pulling and twisting his arm, attempting to create even a small amount of movement. The stone did not shift. He studied the position more carefully. The boulder had fallen into a stable choke point within the canyon. The surrounding rock surfaces were smooth and curved from years of water flow. There were few edges that could provide leverage. Ralston removed his small multi-tool from his pocket and began chipping at the sandstone near the trapped arm. The knife blade was not designed for cutting rock. Only small grains broke away from the surface. The first practical step was to take inventory of what he had. Inside his small backpack were limited supplies: a climbing rope, several carabiners and slings, a small digital camera, a flashlight, a multi-tool knife, and food that included 2 burritos and a small amount of chocolate. His water supply totaled roughly 350 milliliters, less than half a liter. The canyon floor beneath him was dry. There was no immediate source of water nearby. He also had no cell phone reception inside the slot canyon. During the first hours, he concentrated on moving the boulder. Using his legs and free arm, he pushed against the rock while bracing himself against the canyon walls. He attempted to lift or rotate it, The stone remained fixed. He then built a simple pulley system using climbing rope and carabiners, attaching the rope to the rock in several positions to create mechanical advantage. The limited anchor points in the narrow canyon walls made the system unstable. Even when he pulled with his full strength, the rock shifted only slightly before settling again. The trapped arm remained compressed beneath the stone. By the afternoon of the first day, the situation had become physically exhausting. The canyon walls held heat from the sun above, but the slot itself remained mostly shaded. Light entered briefly from overhead, then faded again as the sun moved west. Ralston began rationing his water carefully. He took only small sips, spacing them over several hours. He also reduced unnecessary movement to conserve energy. As evening approached, temperatures inside the canyon dropped quickly. Desert environments often shift sharply between warm daytime conditions and cold nights. Without the sun reaching the canyon floor, the air cooled rapidly. Ralston remained standing for most of the night. The position of his trapped arm prevented him from sitting comfortably. Occasionally, he attempted to brace his body against the canyon walls to rest, but the narrow space made this difficult. During the night, he used his flashlight sparingly to check the condition of the trapped arm. Circulation to the lower part of the arm had already begun to weaken. The next morning, April 27, sunlight briefly reached into the upper canyon walls. The light provided a simple measure of time. Each day, a narrow beam crossed the sandstone above him, for only a short period. Ralston continued attempts to break small pieces of rock away from the boulder and surrounding wall. The knife blade dulled quickly. Progress was minimal. By the second day, he began recording video messages using the digital camera he carried. The recordings documented his situation and his attempts to remain calm while considering possible solutions. The camera also allowed him to track the passing days. His food supply remained mostly untouched during the early stages. Water, however, continued to diminish. The desert air was dry, and the confined canyon offered little airflow. He maintained a schedule that balanced effort and rest. Periods of attempting to shift the rock were followed by long intervals of stillness. The goal was to conserve strength while continuing to search for a workable escape. The canyon remained largely silent. Occasionally, small sounds traveled down the rock corridor wind, moving above the canyon rim, or loose grains of sand shifting along the walls. No hikers passed through the slot during these early days. By the third day, April 28, dehydration began to affect his physical condition more noticeably. His remaining water supply had become extremely limited. Ralston reduced his intake further, allowing only very small sips at long intervals. The trapped arm showed signs of severe compression. Swelling had occurred early, followed by a gradual loss of sensation below the point where the rock held it. He continued attempting to carve away small fragments of stone around the contact point between the arm and the boulder. The knife blade scraped against the rock without creating significant change. At intervals, he examined the rock itself, looking for ways it might fracture or shift. The sandstone walls remained solid. The boulder appeared wedged firmly within the narrowing geometry of the slot canyon. Time passed slowly inside the confined space. Without external movement or sound, the passage of hours depended mainly on light patterns and the camera recordings he made. On the fourth day, April 29, his water supply was nearly gone. Ralston began collecting and drinking his own urine to delay dehydration. The practice provided limited hydration but did not replace the need for water. His body showed increasing signs of fatigue. Lips dried and cracked. Muscle strength weakened gradually. Despite these conditions, he continued working at the rock during short bursts of effort. The canyon environment remained unchanged. Sandstone walls rose vertically around him. A narrow strip of sky was visible above, shifting from pale morning light to deep desert blue during the afternoon before darkening again at night. By the fifth day, April 30, Ralston had been trapped for more than 100 hours. His remaining options had become increasingly limited. The rock could not be moved with available tools. The knife blade was too dull to cut through the surrounding stone. The trapped arm had lost most sensation below the compression point. The possibility of outside rescue had also grown uncertain. Without telling anyone his exact route through Blue John Canyon, search teams would have little information about where to begin looking. Inside the narrow corridor, survival had become a matter of managing time, conserving energy, and evaluating every remaining option. By the early hours of May 1, the canyon remained quiet, the rock unchanged, and the problem unresolved. By the beginning of the 1st of May 2003, Aron Ralston had been trapped inside Blue John Canyon for more than 5 days. The total time would later be calculated as approximately 127 hours. His physical condition had deteriorated steadily during the previous 2 days. The water he had carried into the canyon was gone. The desert air remained dry, and the confined slot allowed very little airflow. His lips and throat had become severely dry, and his strength had diminished. The trapped arm had also changed. In the early hours of the accident, swelling had developed where the rock compressed the limb against the canyon wall. Over time, the swelling subsided, and circulation to the lower portion of the arm had largely stopped. Below the point of compression, sensation had almost completely disappeared. Ralston had already attempted every available method to move the rock. He had pushed with his legs and his free arm. He had constructed rope systems to create leverage. He had tried to break away surrounding rock with his knife. None of these efforts had produced a workable result. By the 5th day, the situation had become a calculation rather than a struggle. The rock could not be moved. No one had passed through the canyon during the previous days. The probability of a random encounter with another hiker appeared increasingly small. The section of Blue John Canyon where he was trapped was not part of a heavily traveled route. At the same time, the condition of the trapped arm had changed in a way that presented a new possibility. The arm had become rigid in several places where bone had weakened under the pressure of the boulder. Later accounts from Ralston describe a moment when he realized that the bones in the forearm could potentially be broken through controlled force. He began applying pressure against the arm using his body weight and the position of the canyon walls. The movement created a fracture in the bones of the forearm. With the bones broken, the remaining barrier to escape was the surrounding tissue. The knife from his multi-tool was small and dull from repeated use against the rock. What followed was a practical action carried out in stages. Using the knife, he cut through the remaining tissue that connected the trapped portion of the arm. The process took time. His limited strength required pauses between movements. Eventually, the arm was freed from the rock. For the first time in more than 5 days, Aron Ralston was able to move away from the boulder that had held him in place. The canyon remained silent, but the conditions of the problem had finally changed. After freeing himself from the boulder during the morning of the 1st of May 2003, Aron Ralston remained alone inside the narrow corridor of Blue John Canyon. The time of his release was later estimated to be shortly after 11 a.m., approximately 127 hours after the accident began. The canyon route ahead still required navigation. Ralston gathered the remaining items from his backpack and secured his injured arm as best he could, using available materials. Blood loss was controlled by tying off the arm above the injury. He then began moving through the canyon. The terrain remained physically demanding. Slot canyons often contain vertical drops and narrow squeezes that require climbing movements even under normal conditions. Despite dehydration and exhaustion, Ralston continued descending through the sandstone passageways. At one point, he used his climbing rope to rappel down a drop, estimated at about 20 meters. The descent required careful movement and concentration, even in his weakened condition. After leaving the tightest section of the canyon, the landscape gradually opened into a broader desert wash. The surrounding terrain was still remote, with long distances between established trails. Ralston began walking across the desert in search of help. Several hours after freeing himself, he encountered a family of hikers visiting the area. The group included visitors from the Netherlands who were traveling through the Canyonlands region. They provided him with water and alerted authorities using emergency communication. Shortly afterward, a rescue helicopter from the Utah Department of Public Safety arrived in the area and transported him to medical care. The long period of isolation inside Blue John Canyon had come to an end. In the years following the event, Aron Ralston's experience in Blue John Canyon became widely documented. The details of the incident were later recorded in his memoir, Between a Rock and a Hard Place, which described the sequence of events leading to the 127-hour ordeal. Medical recovery required several surgeries and a long rehabilitation period. Despite the injury, Ralston eventually returned to climbing and mountaineering. In 2005, he completed his long-standing goal of summiting all of Colorado's 14ers. His survival story also became the subject of the 2010 film 127 Hours, directed by Danny Boyle and based on documented accounts of the event. Blue John Canyon itself remains unchanged. Its narrow sandstone corridors continue to wind through the Utah desert as they have for centuries. Visitors still pass through the same quiet rock passages, where in April 2003, one man remained pinned beneath a boulder for 127 hours, learning how long survival can last when time becomes the only measure left.